96 mirror. Richmond, 96 mirror.
Manning fires to the right, open, caught, touchdown.
The golden era of Indianapolis Colts football, when Manning, Marvin, and Edgerrin led the charge, and Jim Irsay ran the show. That was then, this is now.
We are so proud to continue our dad's legacy, beginning with carrying out his foremost wish to keep the Colts in our family.
Jim Irsay's daughters taking over ownership after their father's passing. ESPN and longtime Colts reporter Stephen Holder joins us with insight on all things Colts 2025 on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. And I'm pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by a very busy guy, Stephen Holder, who covers the Indianapolis Colts and the National Football League at large for ESPN. And Stephen, thanks for joining me.
You got it. I appreciate you having me.
Okay, how is your life about to change now that the Colts are heading into training camp? This is a kind of a 24/7 assignment for you, right?
Yeah, the NFL generally is that way. And so your life is basically dictated by what the team you cover and the stories you cover, what it goes to their beat of their drum. So that's just how it is. We'll have, for example, I went to the gym. We're recording this the day before training camp. I went to the gym and they said, "Oh, you'll be here tomorrow morning?" I said, "No, I'm not going to be here any morning for the next week or 3 because we'll have training camp." I'll see you when I see you. And look, it's fine. We all have work to do. I think in any walk of life, the difference in the job that I do is that you are working in accordance to the people that you follow around. If they go to Jacksonville, I go to Jacksonville. Or if they go to Germany, I go to Germany. If they have an event at some random place, that's where I got to be. So that's just how it works. But that's how you get the full experience and are able to truly document the ins and outs and the daily occurrences. You got to be there. So that's just kind of part and parcel.
Yeah. Stephen, I think I know the answer to this question, but what is the big storyline heading into Colts camp?
Yeah, it's going to be quarterback. There's no doubt about that. It is and has been the quarterback situation for quite some time. And that's not unique to the Colts, right? The quarterback typically takes precedent in the NFL in terms of storylines. I think what's unique about it here is that this is a situation where they're approaching it very different than most teams. This is an open quarterback battle is the way they're packaging this between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. Now, that's not unheard of. The difference, though, is that you have a returning quarterback and a quarterback that's coming in as a free agent who are now battling it out. Typically, from my experience, when you find these quarterback, quote unquote, battles, it's a situation where maybe you have a new draft pick coming in, and the question then becomes, can he usurp that job from the veteran player, which oftentimes happens when you have a highly drafted player. Anthony Richardson was drafted highly, but this is 3 years in now, right? Yeah. So this is not that. So this is very different. They're saying we have a veteran quarterback, somewhat of a veteran with Anthony Richardson in year 3, but we're not sure. So we're going to go bring in this other guy, and he might be the guy instead. And so in summary, what it says to me is, I think the takeaway from that is you're not sure about any of this if you're the Colts. And so that's what they've got to find out. What do they have? And is it going to be enough?
What is your sense of Anthony Richardson's health, how he's recovering from the injury, his mindset, all those things? What do you sense we'll see from Anthony Richardson?
Look, it's truly a day-by-day thing with him just because there have been so many injury issues the last couple of years. But as we sit here today, everything seems positive. The shoulder was certainly a concern at the end of their off-season workouts, I guess, in very early June, maybe the last week of May, I think, into early June. So he missed the final 2 weeks of that off-season program, the off-season practices that they do. But the diagnosis was he's just having soreness, maybe as a result of having that injury, which is almost 2 years ago now. So that is certainly concerning because it was so long ago. And why are you having these issues a year and a half later? That was concerning. But the upside was they prescribed rest. The rest seemed to work. He felt much better in the ensuing weeks. And so he was back home in Florida, working with his private coaches, throwing the football. All reports seem pretty positive. So the question will be like, how much do they limit him in terms of his throwing entering training camp? They may. I think that's in fact to be expected somewhat, but I don't know that this has to be a training wheels kind of situation for him. And let's hope so for his sake. Anthony Richardson needs to get out there and compete. His mindset, it seems good. It has been good all along. And I think that's one thing that gives him a chance here to right the ship is that he does seem to have his head in the right place. He said he embraces the competition. I'm interested to see how this goes. We're going to learn a lot about him and probably Daniel Jones as well.
Yeah, put you on the spot here, and this would be just a guess, obviously. But do you think some people think, hey, we're going to see Daniel Jones under center to start the season? What's your take right now as training camp starts? I know it's just a guess, but what do you think?
I think there's a very good shot of that happening, frankly, because here's the reality. They paid him a lot of money, Daniel Jones, $14 million for one season. Now, granted, in today's league, $14 million for a quarterback is not that much money, but it is when you already have a quarterback. Okay. So that's important context. I think one of the things that works against, a couple of things working against Anthony Richardson here, which is this, that he has certainly struggled, and we've documented that. He hasn't played consistently at all in terms of the level of his play. That is inarguable, and he would tell you the same. But that's fine. That happens with young quarterbacks. The problem is you now have that compounded by his health issues and the injuries that he has sustained. Last season, he missed another 4 games due to injury. He also struggled and was benched for 2 games. So you had a total of 6 games that he missed, in part because of those 2 competing issues that he has dealt with, his performance and his health. Daniel Jones doesn't have the health questions, certainly. The performance questions, they're there. He was released by the Giants last season, so certainly he was not the player they hoped he was. But at least the expectation is that he will be there from Sunday to Sunday. And that, I think, is what is weighing on Anthony Richardson. In closing, I think for Anthony Richardson to win this, I think he has to play far and away better than Daniel Jones here in the preseason to put those doubts to rest and for the Colts to say, in spite of those things, we want to put this guy out there because we think he's better.
You follow the Indianapolis Colts very closely, obviously. Be interested in your take with the ownership and leadership change in the wake of the passing of owner Jim Irsay and the daughters now in charge, Carly, Kaylin, and Casey. Obviously, they're no strangers to that. They've been in there doing the work for a number of years, actually. What is your assessment on how this transition, if you will, is going to be?
First of all, it's fascinating because I think in most of these instances, and this doesn't happen that often, right? There's only 32 teams, only some are family owned, or I think most are family owned. But in terms of the length of this family's ownership, they're one of the legacy ownership groups at this point. And so I would say it's a unique situation this way, in that Jim Irsay was a very unique owner. Okay. And I think even within his family, he was unique. Okay.
Right.
So I think his daughters are going to have a much different style. So that's the thing. I think there's typically a lot of continuity in these kinds of scenarios, but while there is certainly continuity in terms of the most important part, which is who owns the team, in terms of the style and the approach, it could change pretty drastically because there is only one Jim Irsay. There was only one. I'm very interested to see what nuances are different. Number one, you will not see as much of a front-facing approach from the daughters. That is to be expected going in because, first of all, no one has the same presence as their father. So that's just going to be different. But I also think, and this is a little speculative, but it's my perception from having gotten to know Jim Irsay very well, fortunately for me, he was a very emotional owner and he loved his team. The daughters love football too, don't get me wrong. But I think sometimes he led with his heart. And they from my perspective, at least, and what I can tell, they are much more driven, they being his daughters, are much more driven by the business aspect of it. Now, I don't think for them this is just about money or this is just transactional. No, I don't think that. They are invested. They are truly invested. They grew up in this. It's all they have ever known. So they have a passion for it that I think is very clear. And I have no doubt about that. But I do think they will approach it very differently from their father, a little more pragmatically. And I'm interested to see how, if at all, that results and produces different decisions. We'll see. I would say that they have a higher standard than people may expect. There is, let's be honest, there is a sentiment out there, oh, they're women. Will they lead differently? I don't know that is what you should expect. I think you should expect a very high standard. That is how Carly Ursay Gordon in particular has run the business side of the operation for many years, where she has taken the lead in that regard for a long time now. And her father on that side of the franchise was very much in the background. Yeah. She has had very high standards for whether it's marketing or ticket sales or whatever aspect of the business. So I don't anticipate it'll be any different when it comes to football. And we'll see. It's a new era for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Got to look in your crystal ball here, Stephen. The odds makers put the over-under on wins for the Colts at 7.5. What's your take? Are you over or under on 7.5 wins?
I think I'm slightly over, and that could be 8, that could be 9, but I think they have the last couple of years been right there, 9 and 8, 8 and 9. That's who they are, and I think they can be that pretty much with the team currently constituted the way it is. That's their baseline. The question for me is going to be, because they do have a lot of talent, and they went out and procured more talent this year. So the question, though, for me is, and what typically happens in the NFL is your star players have to lift you a little bit more. They're the ones that make the difference, and primarily the quarterback. So There we go, full circle, right? Back to the quarterback question. Can whoever plays quarterback, can that quarterback elevate them at all? I think the likelihood is that the quarterback is going to have to just be the guy who doesn't screw it up, for lack of a better word. I think that's where the baseline is for them. Because if they do that, they can be a team that's competitive. But it takes more than that at quarterback to really, I think, go out there and win your division or compete in the playoffs. You have to have a higher level of play at quarterback, in my opinion. And that is going to be, I think, the biggest question for this team. What level of performance do they get there? And is it enough to elevate them? That's going to be the fundamental question.
Be fun to watch, and we'll be watching very soon in a matter of weeks. Shifting gears from football to basketball. The Pacers obviously coming off an incredible run, an exciting run for the team to the Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and it ended obviously in an extremely difficult way. As you look at the outlook for the Pacers with the Tyrese Halliburton injury, obviously he's out all next year. Is next year kind of a throwaway year for the franchise, unfortunately, do you think?
It's definitely a transitional year. There's no question about it. And I think the Miles Turner decision kind of suggests that they understand that. There was a path to them keeping Miles Turner, and they elected not to. Okay, so maybe that tells us something there. I think you have to consider that. Yeah, Tyrese Halliburton, you will not see him next year. That's been confirmed. But what I would say, though, is this is a team that still has they still have players like Siakam. They have other players who are coming back off injury. They have a number of young players who rose to the occasion repeatedly in the playoffs. There's arguably still a core there that can be pretty competitive. And I think that's why it'll be interesting to see whether they agree and how strongly they agree. Because I think on paper, look, they're not going to be a contender, certainly not projected to be one. But I do think there is something to be said for not lowering the standard and not saying, oh, we're not going to be good this year. I don't think that's healthy for your team in the grand scheme. And so I want to see if they're serious about this, and it costs money to go out and compete, certainly. But I think it's healthy for your franchise and the players who are out there on the floor. Granted, they're getting a salary to play basketball, it is what it is, but they also are there to compete, and they want to compete. So they should be getting the message from the front office that that we're not letting up here. They're human. They understand the circumstances, but they also don't want to feel as though it's being taken for granted that they won't be very competitive. I don't think that's healthy for them. I don't think anybody wants that, whether it be the fans, the players, or otherwise. We'll see. I think they have to approach it like this is still a meaningful season, even though the realities are very clear, I think.
Yeah. What is your take? You mentioned the front office. What do you think the mindset of Kevin Pritchard is? Because, and rightfully, I think he's gotten a lot of accolades for the job he's done with the Indiana Pacers and the acquisitions and the various moves he's made. What do you think if you get inside his head, what his mindset is heading into next season?
It's tricky, right? Because this was a team built around Tyrese Halliburton. And I think stylistically is an important part of it too. They were built that way stylistically to play with Tyrese Halliburton because of the style that he plays. It's a very unique style. High tempo, push the ball, distribute, get other players involved. We see a little element of this with the Indiana Fever. Caitlin Clark is a unique player. And I noticed in her rookie season, not to get off topic, but in her rookie season, there were some of those players were not used to playing that style of basketball, push the ball, distribute the ball, creative passing. That's Tyrese Halliburton. And so the Pacers, unlike the Fever maybe of 2024, they understood that and built that team to play with that kind of style, with that unique player that they have. That is the challenge for Kevin Pritchard. Does it still work without him? And even though the talent is still there, it is going to be a challenge. So I realize I'm contradicting the previous statement about be competitive and go for it. But it is a challenge, and he's facing these realities, and I don't have any good answers, and he probably doesn't have any good answers. It is a very tricky thing. We'll see if there are some moves they can make. Probably nothing earth-shattering at this point, but they're going to have to really, I would say this, though. He does have a very good coach in Rick Carlisle, and I think Carlisle has shown that he can get this team to adapt. I think you look back a couple of years ago, they were a very disappointing defensive team. And yet I thought this year you saw that team, that same team, for the most part, those same players find the will to play very consistent defense, which I think was the most underrated thing about this team down the stretch. That's their secret weapon, is Rick Carlisle and his ability to shape and mold and get creative. So to his credit, they're going to be relying heavily on him.
Much more ahead with ESPN NFL reporter Stephen Holder. We'll talk a little WNBA, Indiana Fever. We'll talk the state of journalism, sports journalism, and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
We build Indiana. The Laborers International Union of North America builds and maintains roads, bridges, and other essential infrastructure that make us the crossroads of America. So thanks to LIUNA members' work, Hoosiers have a better quality of life, like access to utilities, easier routes to jobs, schools, or medical care, and deliveries keep moving. We build Indiana for good jobs and stronger communities. The Laborers International Union of North America. We are LIUNA.
And welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Stephen Holder, ESPN's Indianapolis Colts and NFL reporter. And Stephen, really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And obviously we talked Colts and football, NFL in the first part of the podcast, talking basketball. Let's talk WNBA, because that is a league that certainly is in the spotlight, seems to be in an ascending kind of mode right now. But some questions around things. First of all, the WNBA All-Star Game obviously was just in Indianapolis, sold out crowd, a lot of attention. If you look at the signage downtown, the corporate activation was very substantial. It seems like the league is in a pretty good place. What would be your take?
I was at the game. I attended several events over the weekend during the All-Star weekend. And I was very pleasantly surprised at the energy and the enthusiasm around it. I don't know what the economic impact ended up being, nor your department, but it seemed as if there were certainly a lot of visitors.
Yeah.
There was definitely an energy. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't that different than the energy I felt during the NBA Finals. Now that's a little different thing, right? It's not an event that's planned years
Yeah.
out. It just advanced and it just happens organically, right? It's different, but I still think it's a good point of reference. I thought that there was just a lot of energy, and the city does what the city does, which is really know how to put on an event. And I heard from a lot of my friends in media and so forth, and even new friends who I met who were really impressed with just the optics of how Indianapolis hosted the game, the signage in particular, and the building, the banners, I mean, everything. You couldn't walk a block without knowing the WNBA All-Star Game was here, and I think that's entirely the point, is to make it feel like this was. They were rolling out the red carpet, or in this case, the orange carpet, if you might have seen that. They did a really good job of just making it feel you were constantly bombarded by images that made you feel like this is something important.
Yeah.
And that's the way you host something. I think someone who has covered, you name it, Super Bowls and NBA All-Star games and you name it, big national championship games, I didn't see much difference now the size maybe it's not a Super Bowl, clearly, but in terms of the approach, it was very much like you would see in terms of a city hosting a Super Bowl. It was no different, I thought, in terms of the lengths they went to make it feel something important. And I commend city leadership and the civic leaders for that.
It strikes me that this is really a critical time for the league, again, for all the reasons you mentioned. The league is on an upswing, attendance, television, all those types of things you look at. And at the same time, the collective bargaining agreement is coming up, and there's this pay equity issue. The players for the All-Star game had the T-shirts that I think said something like, pay us what you owe us. There's even talk, in a worst-case scenario, of a boycott, the kind of thing. Your guess, your take on where this goes, because a lot more eyeballs on the WNBA now, and the popularity, the corporate sponsorships, all that kind of thing. But also there's this pay issue that is out there as well. How do you see this playing out?
This is the not so fun part of growing up as a league. Okay. And every sports league that grows to a level that it wants to has to go through this. The NBA was here probably 40 years ago, right? And maybe even less than that to some degree, to becoming what it is today. So the WNBA, it is a very pivotal time for the league. I think they're going to have to step up in terms of the pay equity. And look, they're not going to make NBA salaries. No one's going to be making Tyrese Halliburton money because the league just doesn't produce that kind of revenue. But the revenue is increasing sharply. The TV deal is going to be key to that. Look, that's what fuels all of these collective bargaining agreement conversations. It's the TV money, and that is going up very substantially. And so that, I think, puts the league in a place where they can't make the argument they used to make because the dollars just weren't there before. And I still don't know all the economics, and I don't know that all of us have all the details, but look, there's still a lot of deficits, I'm sure, that they're dealing with. And there have been many years where they were not making money, and that is a fact, right? So that's not going to just be that's not going to be just glossed over. Okay, let's be clear. These owners are not going to do that. However, if you want this to be a league where the players maybe are able to maybe forego playing in other leagues and those kinds of things and really give themselves to the WNBA, then you've got to entice them to do that. It is a real pivotal time. And I do think that there is a contradiction when a player like Caitlin Clark or Aja Wilson, when they're drawing huge television audiences, they're moving games to bigger venues in some cases, and then you're in some cases making $80,000 or $90,000. It's a tough sell. It's just It's not going to fly. And to the players, to their side, look, they understand they have to seize this moment, and they are. So I think they understand that they have a growing audience, they have eyeballs, and they have the ability to reach that audience, and they are doing that. So I'm watching it as just an outsider. That it's very fascinating.
Let's talk a little bit about Stephen Holder. You're a Florida guy, right? Grew up in
Yeah.
Miami. Talk a little bit about what growing up was like.
Yeah, grew up in Miami, Florida. My parents from the Caribbean, both from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. So they didn't know a whole lot about sports journalism, I assume. Neither did I. I tell this story a lot, but it's worth repeating. I had a high school journalism teacher that introduced me to journalism. She was the yearbook advisor. I took the class. I said, well, this is an easy A. And she said, you should take my journalism class next year, I think my junior year. So I did that. It's like, sure, I love easy A's. But I did get an A, but it's because I grew to love the class. Not because she gave me the grade. And I didn't understand the concept of journalism at all, but I came to really be interested in it the summer before my senior year of high school, if I recall. I went to a minority journalism workshop at the University of Miami, 1 week on campus. They threw you in the deep end, you wrote stories, you reported. And during that week, they said, you seem like you like sports. We'll give you a sports story. This is with the faculty from the university, where I later went to school, by the way. And I was assigned a story on a high school baseball player who was crushing it across town, was going to be a high pick in the Major League Baseball draft. That player, he turned out okay. His name was Alex Rodriguez.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was the first sports story I'd ever written. And so it really is a milepost in my life, even though I don't even know where that article is today. I dropped the ball on that, or my mom maybe did. But it's something I'll never forget, because it's what opened my eyes to the fact that, like, journalism, there's a lane for sports journalism too. So anyhow, fast forward, during college, I started, like a lot of young journalists, I was what we call a stringer, which is just basically a very poorly paid freelancer covering high school football for the Miami Herald locally, $25 a game when I started, 1995. Wow. And I think they moved it to $50 later, which, let's be honest, I wasn't there for the money.
Right.
But I ended up working there for 8 years. Even after graduation, I worked there. And when I left there, I was covering the NBA. It was a pretty remarkable story. Right place, right time. People leave. They gave you an opportunity. And I just seized it. I worked hard, and I was able to live up to the faith that they showed in me. So I'm very thankful for all the opportunities. I started out covering high school sports and telling great stories there. And I tell young journalists, don't get caught up in what you're covering. Just understand that every story is important to who you're writing about or who's reading it. It's important to them. Some of the best stories I've ever told were at the high school level, whether it be, I wrote a story about a cross-country runner one time who had, during the Fidel Castro days, had ridden on a raft and was picked up by the Coast Guard and brought to Miami and ended up being a cross-country champion in South Florida. Those are the kinds of stories that you're able to tell. And that's a great story, whether he's a high school runner or whether he's an Olympian. Yeah. So I really am fortunate. I've seen it all. I've been to multiple countries doing this job. Like, I'm fortunate. Now, journalism has changed a lot, but I still love it. And I consider myself to be very lucky.
What you talk about that, Stephen, because you have experienced the dramatic change in the way that journalism, sports journalism, has changed from a traditional print background. And I think you came here and worked at Indy Star for a time, but it's much different now, obviously, with digital streaming, all the social media, all the different things that go into it. For you, for a journalist, a sports journalist, what's been the biggest change for you, the biggest adjustment?
So I would say a couple of things. First off, the media environment, as you well know, is so fragmented now. And I think there's also, media literacy is not what it used to be. So that's a challenge where it's not the consumer's fault necessarily, but it is a reality, right? We have to then, as journalists, figure out how to navigate that, which is really hard, but it is a reality that we have to deal with. So there's that. Then the social media aspect, particularly with sports, I think, and really any news for the most part, the fundamental facts travel fast. And look, it's great if you can break the story, but I think that has become almost less important, where we can distinguish ourselves, because whoever breaks it, the story gets disseminated in 30 seconds, right? We don't even remember who, quote unquote, broke the story. I think where we can really differentiate ourselves, and this is the advice I give a lot of college students who want to enter this field, is the breadth of the storytelling that we can do. Okay, so story X happens. Okay, so now what? That's your job. Tell people more. Give them the details, fill in the blanks. And so that's where I really focus my efforts on that part of it, because things come down, news comes down, a trade, a signing, an injury, whatever, right? And so people will have the nuts and bolts of that very quickly, and they're probably on to the next thing. But for those who actually want a deeper understanding, can you provide that? And do you have the ability to go out and report those details with depth? That's where I think there's a real opportunity for still the traditional journalists to really separate yourself. And I think, look, again, people may not understand necessarily. I talk to people all the time who are like, okay, who do you work for and how does this work? Maybe they don't always get it. But the bottom line is, if an article I write finds its way to them, into their feed, or someone texts them the link, whatever the case, I want them to read it and feel like they learned something. And so if I do that, whether they remember me or not, then I provided something to them. So that's really what it's about. It's a tricky thing to navigate, but I think there is still a way. Now, when it comes to monetizing it, that's a whole other challenge. That challenge well, but I can't control that part. But definitely think as the reporter, it's about details, reporting the details and breadth, and giving the fullness in the reporting, not just the minor details.
Would agree with that. Good journalism wins the day typically.
Yes.
Stephen Holder, NFL reporter for ESPN, following the Indianapolis Colts very closely. It's been great to catch up with you, especially to catch you right before the Colts head to training camp when you get really busy. But enjoy your work very much, and we'll be following your coverage of the Colts and the NFL going forward.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate
All right. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. We're a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.